Ever wonder how people kept track of time before smartphones? Can you imagine living without knowing exactly what time it is? In the medieval period, people managed their days without digital clocks, wristwatches, or even reliable mechanical timepieces. Yet somehow life went on, crops were planted, prayers were said, and appointments were kept. The medieval methods of timekeeping were ingenious, practical, and sometimes surprisingly accurate, relying on nature, religious practices, and simple technologies that shaped how people experienced the passing hours and seasons. Number 7. Astrolabes and astronomical instruments. Did you know that medieval scholars could predict celestial movements with instruments made of brass and wood? Imagine holding the medieval equivalent of a computer in your palm. The astrolabe was perhaps the most sophisticated timekeeping device of the medieval period, a multifunctional astronomical instrument that allowed educated users to tell time, track celestial bodies, and even make astrological predictions. First developed by ancient Greeks and perfected by medieval Islamic scholars, astrolabes made their way to Europe around the 10th century. These beautiful brass discs featured rotating parts that modeled the movement of the sun, moon, and stars across the sky. By aligning the instrument with specific stars, a trained user could determine the time at night with impressive accuracy. The astrolabe was the smartphone of its day, explains Professor Martha Jennings, medieval technology historian. It could perform multiple functions related to timekeeping and navigation, but required specialized knowledge to operate correctly. Astrolabes weren't everyday items, however. They were expensive, requiring precision craftsmanship, and the knowledge to use them was limited mainly to astronomers, navigators, and scholars. King Alfred the Great reportedly owned one, and Geoffrey Chaucer even wrote a treatise on how to use them for his son. While the average medieval peasant would never have touched an astrolabe, these devices were crucial for advancing medieval understanding of time and the cosmos. Other astronomical instruments included quadrants, simpler versions of astrolabes, armillary spheres, models of celestial objects, and nocturnal discs, specialized nighttime timekeeping devices. These instruments allowed the educated elite to track time with an accuracy that would have seemed magical to the average person. The medieval Islamic world particularly excelled in astronomical timekeeping. The astrolabist al-Zarqali created instruments of such precision that they remained unmatched for centuries. These sophisticated devices weren't just practical, they were often works of art, decorated with inscriptions and intricate engravings that reflected their status as precious objects of both science and wealth. Number 6. Seasonal calendars and agricultural timekeeping. How did farmers know when to plant without weather apps? What if your entire survival depended on getting the timing of seasons right? Medieval people, especially those working the land, relied heavily on natural indicators to track the changing seasons and agricultural cycles. The medieval year was deeply intertwined with farming schedules, creating a calendar that was both practical and culturally significant. Medieval farmers tracked time through a combination of natural observation, inherited wisdom, and community practices that had evolved over generations. Medieval agricultural calendars were sophisticated systems based on generations of collected knowledge, says Dr. Thomas Hartwell, agricultural historian. They combined astronomical observations with practical experience about local growing conditions. One of the most delightful visual representations of these agricultural timekeeping methods appears in medieval books of hours and church calendars, which often featured the labors of the months, illustrations showing the typical farming activity for each month. January might show people warming themselves by the fire, March might depict pruning vines, June would show haymaking, and September would feature the grape harvest. Farmers watched for specific natural events that signaled times for planting and harvesting. The appearance of certain migratory birds, the blooming of particular flowers, or the behavior of livestock all served as reliable indicators of seasonal changes. In England, the first cuckoo calls of spring or the ripening of blackberries in late summer were nature's timekeepers. Medieval agricultural timekeeping also relied heavily on folk wisdom captured in rhymes and sayings passed down through generations. Many of these proverbs survive today. Oak before ash will have a splash. Ash before oak, we're in for a soak, was used to predict summer rainfall based on which trees leafed first in spring. The agricultural calendar was divided into manageable periods marked by saints' days, which served as convenient temporal landmarks. Farmers knew to plant certain crops around St. Benedict's Day, March 21st, or to expect to begin harvest around Lammas Day, August 1st. These religious markers created a shared temporal framework that everyone in the community understood, regardless of literacy. This seasonal timekeeping wasn't just practical, it bound communities together in shared temporal rhythms. Village life moved through predictable cycles of work and rest, feast and fast, creating a common experience of time that reinforced social bonds and cultural identity. Number 5. Church bells and monastic hours. Did you hear that? Imagine your entire day organized around the sound of bells. Throughout medieval Europe, the ringing of church bells served as the most common and accessible form of public timekeeping, structuring daily life for everyone from peasants to nobility. Monasteries and churches divided the day into canonical hours for prayer, typically matins, midnight, lauds, dawn, prime, early morning, terce, mid-morning, sext, noon, none, mid-afternoon, vespers, evening, and compline, night. Bells would ring to announce each of these prayer times, creating an auditory framework that organized daily life even for those not in religious orders. For medieval people, bells were the voice of God marking time, explains medieval historian Carolyn Richards. The sound of bells could be heard for miles, literally shaping the temporal experience of entire communities. The importance of bells extended beyond mere timekeeping. They announced deaths, celebrations, emergencies, and market openings. Different ringing patterns conveyed different messages, creating a complex auditory communication system that medieval people could interpret instantly. A slow, solemn toll meant a death in the community, while rapid ringing might signal a fire or attack. Larger towns and cities might have multiple churches with their own bell schedules, sometimes leading to a competitive cacophony of time signals across the urban landscape. By the later medieval period, some Italian cities elected official timekeepers to ensure bells rang at appropriate times, highlighting how important standardized time had become for urban commercial life. The physical toll of ringing massive church bells shouldn't be underestimated. Bell ringers held important positions in medieval communities, maintaining a crucial public service that required considerable strength and timing. In larger churches, teams of ringers worked together to manage the heavy bells that might weigh several tons. Monastic timekeeping was particularly precise because the strict regulation of prayer times was considered essential to proper worship. Some monasteries employed designated monks as timekeepers who would track the hours and alert the bell ringer when to sound the call to prayer. At night, this might require staying awake to observe the stars or tending to water clocks that needed regular maintenance. The sound of bells created what historians call acoustic communities, groups of people united by the shared experience of hearing the same temporal signals. The range of church bells effectively defined the boundaries of these communities, with people living within earshot sharing a common experience of time that created social cohesion. Number 4. Sundials and shadow clocks. Would you trust your shadow to tell you the time? Could a stick in the ground really help organize an entire society? Medieval people relied heavily on sundials, from elaborate stone installations at cathedrals to simple portable versions, to track daylight hours with surprising accuracy. Sundials work on a straightforward principle. As the sun moves across the sky, the shadow cast by a gnomon, the projecting piece on a sundial, moves across a marked surface, indicating the time. Medieval sundials ranged from ornate astronomical instruments to basic scratch dials etched into church walls. Every cathedral and major church would have had some form of sundial, notes medieval architecture expert William Davenport. These weren't just functional items, but often elaborate decorative elements that displayed the church's commitment to learning and precision. The earliest medieval sundials were simple horizontal or vertical dials that divided the day into equal parts from sunrise to sunset. These unequal hours varied in length depending on the season, with daylight hours longer in summer and shorter in winter. This system, inherited from ancient Rome, made practical sense for societies that organized activities around available natural light. By the later medieval period, more sophisticated sundials appeared that could account for seasonal variations and show equal hours, the consistent 60-minute hours we use today. These required more complex mathematics to design and greater skill to construct. The magnificent astronomical clock at Wells Cathedral, dating from around 1390, features a face that displays both the time and the movement of celestial bodies. Portable sundials became increasingly common among the wealthy and educated classes in the later medieval period. These pocket-sized instruments, often crafted from ivory or precious metals, allowed travelers to determine the approximate time wherever they went. Some elaborate examples combined sundials with compasses and even miniature astronomical computers. Church sundials often featured religious imagery and inscriptions reminding viewers of time's spiritual significance. A common motto found on medieval sundials was Vulnerant omnes, ultima necat, each hour wounds, the last kills, emphasizing the Christian understanding of time as a progression toward judgment and eternal life. Sundials had practical limitations, of course. They were useless at night or on cloudy days, and they needed to be specifically designed for the latitude where they would be used, as the sun's path varies depending on location. Different designs addressed various needs: horizontal dials in gardens, vertical dials on south-facing walls, and even cup-shaped dials that could tell time from multiple angles. Medieval people used improvised methods when formal sundials weren't available. The length and direction of one's own shadow served as a rough time indicator, with various folk traditions suggesting that when your shadow was a certain length, often measured in foot lengths, it corresponded to particular times of day. Number 3. Water clocks and early mechanical timepieces. Can water tell time? Would you believe that dripping water was once cutting-edge technology? Before reliable mechanical clocks, medieval timekeepers often relied on the steady flow of water to measure passing hours, especially when the sun wasn't visible. Water clocks, also known as clepsydry, had ancient origins but remained important throughout the medieval period. These devices operated on a simple principle: water dripping at a consistent rate from one container to another could measure elapsed time. Markings on the receiving vessel indicated how much time had passed as the water level rose. Water clocks filled a crucial gap in medieval timekeeping, explains Dr. Eleanor Matthews, technology historian. When sundials couldn't function at night or during cloudy weather, water clocks kept time flowing, so to speak. Monasteries particularly valued water clocks for tracking nighttime prayer hours when monks needed to wake for matins at midnight. Some designs included ingenious alarm mechanisms. Water filling a siphon would eventually tip over small metal balls onto a cymbal, creating enough noise to wake the sleeping monks. Despite their usefulness, water clocks had significant drawbacks. They required constant maintenance, worked less effectively in freezing temperatures, and tended to flow inconsistently due to varying water pressure as the upper vessel emptied. Nevertheless, they remain the most reliable indoor timekeeping technology until the spread of mechanical clocks in the later medieval period. The true technological revolution in medieval timekeeping came with the development of mechanical clocks in the late 13th century. These early devices, powered by falling weights rather than electricity, represented a massive leap forward in timekeeping technology. The invention of the escapement mechanism was particularly crucial. This ingenious device regulated the release of power from the falling weights, creating the familiar tick-tock rhythm. The earliest mechanical clocks didn't have faces or hands as we know them today. Instead, they were primarily designed to ring bells at specified intervals, making them essentially automated bell-ringing devices. These monumental clocks were typically installed in church towers or communal buildings, becoming sources of civic pride and technological achievement. By the 14th century, public mechanical clocks began appearing in major European cities, often commissioned by wealthy merchants or civic authorities who recognized the commercial value of standardized time. The famous astronomical clock in Prague, installed in 1410, not only displayed the time but tracked the positions of the sun and moon and included moving figures that performed on the hour. While these early mechanical clocks were far less accurate than modern timepieces, potentially gaining or losing up to 15 minutes per day, they represented a significant step toward the standardized, mechanical measurement of time that would eventually transform society. Most importantly, they introduced the concept of time as something regular, mechanical, and increasingly independent from natural cycles. Number 2, candle clocks and fire timekeeping. Would you trust a burning candle to wake you for an important meeting? Could fire itself be tamed to track the hours? Medieval people developed ingenious methods of using controlled burning to measure passing time, creating some of the most accessible timekeeping devices available to ordinary households. Candle clocks were exactly what they sound like, candles marked at regular intervals that burned down predictably, indicating the passing of time. Craftsmen created special time-keeping candles with markings at regular intervals, sometimes embedding small metal balls that would fall into a metal dish with an audible ping as the candle burned down, serving as an alarm. Candle clocks democratized timekeeping, says medieval domestic historian Dr. Sarah Blackwood. Unlike expensive mechanical clocks or complex astrolabes, almost any household could afford some form of candle timing device. Alfred the Great, King of Wessex in the 9th century, famously used candle clocks to manage his time. Historical accounts describe how he had special candles made that burned at a uniform rate for 4 hours each. 6 candles would thus last exactly 24 hours, allowing the king to divide his day between prayer, sleep, and royal duties. For more precise timing of shorter intervals, medieval people sometimes used knotted ropes that burned at predictable rates. These slow matches were particularly useful for cooking, allowing cooks to time how long something had been boiling or baking without constant monitoring. Incense sticks and time-burning ropes served similar functions in various parts of medieval Europe and Asia. In China and Japan, elaborately designed incense clocks could track hours with different fragrances for each time period, adding an olfactory dimension to timekeeping that must have created a rich sensory experience. Fire timekeeping had obvious limitations. The rate of burning could be affected by drafts, humidity, or the quality of the materials. And there was always the risk of fire, particularly if someone fell asleep while using a candle clock. Nevertheless, these simple devices remained popular throughout the medieval period for their accessibility and relative reliability. In monasteries and noble households, oil lamps with marked reservoirs provided another form of fire timekeeping. As the oil level dropped past marked lines, observers could track passing time. These devices were particularly useful for nighttime timekeeping when more sophisticated methods weren't visible. Perhaps the most poetic aspect of fire timekeeping was how it physically embodied the medieval understanding of time as something that was constantly being consumed, a tangible reminder of mortality and the passing of life itself. As the candle burned down or the incense stick turned to ash, time wasn't just measured but visibly used up before one's eyes. Number 1. Biological clocks and natural timekeeping. Did you know your body keeps better time than most medieval clocks? Have you ever woken up moments before your alarm? The most fundamental timekeeping system in medieval society wasn't mechanical or astronomical. It was biological and deeply intuitive, rooted in the body's natural rhythms and observation of the environment. Medieval people were remarkably attuned to their internal clocks. Without artificial lighting to disrupt natural sleep cycles, most people naturally woke at dawn and grew tired after sunset, their bodies responding to the changing light levels that signaled time to wake or rest. This biological timekeeping created a natural daily rhythm that most modern people have lost. Medieval people had a more embodied relationship with time, explains anthropological historian Dr. James Cummings. They didn't just know what time it was, they felt it through hunger, fatigue, and the changing light. Hunger served as a reliable timekeeper for meal schedules. The body's natural appetite patterns helped structure the day around typical meal times, with physical hunger signaling when it was approaching the hour for breaking fast or having the evening meal. This biological clock was reinforced by social customs around eating times. Animals provided natural timekeeping services in rural settings. Roosters crowing at dawn served as reliable alarm clocks, while the behavior of farm animals and wildlife offered clues about the time of day and changing seasons. Farmers knew that cattle typically lie down before rain, that certain birds sing at specific hours, and that chickens naturally return to roost as daylight fades. The position of the sun in the sky allowed for rough estimates of time without any instruments at all. Medieval people commonly divided the day into morning, midday, afternoon, and evening based simply on the sun's position. Sun up a spear's height or sun 2 fists above the horizon were common ways of communicating time. Stars and constellations provided nighttime temporal guidance. The positioning of well-known star groups like the Plough, Big Dipper, or Orion allowed people to roughly track the hours after dark. Particular stars appearing above specific landmarks might signal that it was time for bed or time for night watchmen to change shifts. The human need to urinate also served as a surprisingly reliable timekeeper. Medieval monks reportedly used the time between needing to urinate during the night as a rough measure of how much time had passed, the bladder clock being particularly useful during long winter nights when more sophisticated timekeeping was difficult. The moon's phases structured a longer temporal framework that was particularly important for activities affected by tides or moonlight. Fishing communities planned their activities around tidal patterns, while travelers preferred to journey during the full moon when nighttime visibility was better. Weather patterns and seasonal changes provided temporal context throughout the year. The first frost, the return of particular birds, the blossoming of certain plants, all served as reliable markers in what historians call the calendar of nature that helped medieval people track the passage of time on a larger scale. Ever considered how different your life would be if you had to rely on shadows, candles, and church bells to know the time? What forgotten skills of temporal awareness might we modern people have lost with our constant digital displays and standardized time? Medieval timekeeping reminds us that humans have always found ingenious ways to structure their days and measure their lives, regardless of technological limitations, and perhaps there's wisdom in those ancient methods that our frantically scheduled modern world could still learn from.